Welcome to the Bleeding Goat Podcast. I have a script. I'm told that this is going to be helpful, so here we go, right? So just as a reminder, we're going through the Monster Manual A through Z. We're currently on episode 4, so we're on animated objects. Animated objects in the Monster Manual are lumped together 3 different examples. I would call them examples of animated objects. And they hark back to some of the classic fantasy monsters, right? So they're the animated suit of armor, the flying sword, and the rug of smothering. And these monsters are great because they offer a nostalgic feel. They really help set the tone of a story, and your players knowing where you are in a story is rather helpful. So I remember when I was a kid, I used to have nightmares for years, recurring nightmare of an animated suit of armor with an axe chasing me through some kind of maze of doorways. And ultimately, whenever I was about to die, I woke up, but who knows what that means. But the point is, there is something absolutely horrifying about a faceless, nameless thing attacking you. And so I would lean into that, right? Animated objects have blind sight per the Monster Manual. They can operate perfectly well in magical darkness. And so if you're thinking of a horror story, definitely do that. If you're playing with new players, they or even young kids, they might not see the animated suit or armor or the flying sword coming. But if you're playing with veteran players, they're probably going to have a lot of fun knowing that the hallway full of suits of armor is going to attack them. That said, too often I believe that animated objects like suits of armor, like the Rugs of Smothering flying swords, are basically used as gotchas. The Monster Manual doesn't do a lot to change that. There's even flavor text about a skeleton holding a rusty sword, and then it springs forth and attacks them. So there's another line in the Monster Manual that talks about a flying carpet, and it's not a flying carpet. They get on top of it, and oh no, it's a rug of smothering. A rug of smothering is exactly what it sounds like. Just so you know, like the players get on top of it, it wraps them, it grapples them. And the real fun thing about the rug of smothering is when you attack the rug, when the person's grappled inside of it, half the damage done to it goes to the rug. The other half goes to the player inside of it. So really lots and lots of fun. And if you are the kind of party that sends a scout in front of you and they like get smothered by the rug, like nobody's going to save you. So it's kind of horrifying. But the whole point is it's a gotcha. It's a surprise, right? And it's fun. But there's just as much likelihood that your experienced players know, and they're just not going to be got. You're going to end up with, inevitably at some point, some party pooper who is going to metagame, tell everyone, oh, this is an animated suit of armor, and kind of ruin the fun. Once they've ruined the fun, there's not a ton that can be done. I mean, these are low-level CR monsters. We're talking about, I think the flying sword is maybe a CR 1/4, and the animated suit of armor is CR 1. The rug of smothering is a CR 2. You just hit them. They only have so many hit points and they die. And that's kind of good because they're low-level monsters. You don't have many options as low-level players. But there is at least some way to spice up these low-level monsters. And the first thing to remember is that with low-level monsters, more is more. A single suit of armor you can run away from. They can't, all of these creatures, monsters, have blind sight out to 120 feet. So it is pretty significant. But at the same time, after you pass that threshold, they have no idea that you even exist. They're just blind. And so having several suits of armor in a mansion or multiple rugs of smothering makes it more like the best kid game in the world, which is the floor is lava. So when you're running away, if you have to think about, well, do I turn over to this corner because I don't want to die? It adds a little bit more intrigue to a rather stationary being. The second thing to remember is, as mentioned, darkness. So shadows can make things appear to move, and especially if people get a bad perception roll, having players attack regular suits of armor, or as most characters will do, because their players are idiots, right? They'll attack 9 suits of armor. They'll destroy 9 suits of armor in preparation for that one animated suit that doesn't actually have to exist. So this is why players hate DMs, but whatever. And I think the third thing that is rather different and understated is a line from the Monster Manual about how animated objects usually say one word, maybe a sentence, or maybe even a handful of sentences. But those created in the Feywild can hold entire conversations. And it's like, again, it's like one line in the Monster Manual, and you're like, wait, but say what? Because if they can hold entire conversations, I have questions. Like, can an animated object resemble a sentient item? And do sentient items take umbrage to this? Does the animated object think of themselves as inferior? Can the players actually tell the difference? So Turing test aside, right, this gives us as storytellers the opportunity, at the very least, to introduce riddles. So sure, maybe the animated armor is a physical test, but the entire time it's trying to teach the characters something, or it's a test of wits. And beyond that kind of simple riddle, we have the fact that the Feywild seems to be really good at making these. So they're maybe like toys. And that introduces the question of the maker. Who made these animated objects? Why? And just because they're low level, we have a tendency to think, I would think that people have a tendency to believe that makes them kind of very ubiquitous. But I don't necessarily think that's true, right? So we have 3D printers, but they're still sculpting. And sculpture just kind of serves a different purpose. But as a storyteller, it lets us decide if the animated objects are from an age that's, like the alpha stage, like it's like our current existence is more complex, but before they were just learning how to basically make these animated objects. And so later on, they get replaced with shield guardians or golems. Or maybe, again, there's something completely different and they're a niche commodity or they're artisan. If you think about it as a progression, you could follow a lich's career over the course of 1,000 years as you go from like dungeon to dungeon, upping your game. I don't know. I think that would be an entirely fun adventure set. Anyway, so then we're back to the line about the Feywild, because certain styles, the Monster Manual suggests, depends on location or training. So guild merchants, wizards, fae, they finally have something to use their history on, right? They can look up to see if there's any hints about who made these things and maybe a weakness that they have, a maker model, kind of like a Honda or a Toyota. But so maybe they have a serial number, right? And maybe this one doesn't. Either way, it tells us something about the owner. How did the owner come to own it, or how did the owner come to create it? And then owners and locations, I think, is where we finally get to like really the interesting part of animated objects. So if your players are in a factory and they find an animated object, it may not be activated yet, which is a really nice low-level magic item, right? Like turn it on, give it a trigger, boom, you have a CR1, CR2 kind of item that can have lots of appeal later on, right? Another idea to steal from Disney, because Disney steals from everybody, is to talk about Beauty and the Beast, right? So sure, the animated objects in Beauty and the Beast are really cursed people, so I'm kind of making them less than. But the idea is that the cursed people and the curse itself extends to the entire household. It's a location. And if you're talking about the entire household, then it's possible that the players are going to see animated objects as a one-off encounter, and over time they might come to realize that they can't win this fight until they solve the riddle that answers the curse or whatever the power source that's being driven from the core of the household. Just don't be surprised if your players continually smash animated objects that are trying to give them the riddle that would save the adventure. That's pretty par for the course. One thing that is just assumed by the monster manual is that these monsters are magic. And I would suggest that you try to define your version of magic and how these animated objects work. Does your magic have a shelf life? Because aside from they're going to detect as transmutation, what actually gives these animated objects their tick? Maybe these animated horror objects are recharged by souls or blood or screams. I stole that from Disney too. And so they're dripping or they're stained from their last kill. The book makes it clear that animated objects follow the last command given to them. So if you pair a very specific charge with a trigger, maybe that they don't necessarily trigger for just anything because they have limited charges. So what that lets you do as a storyteller is give the description of blood and stains on the armor to the familiars, but then it demands that the players, through their characters, actually step into harm's way if they want the full story. So obviously you got to give them some reason to keep going, but still, this is why players hate DM. Once we have those two things combined, we can get to the point where animated objects don't awaken unless whatever is in front of them is large enough that killing it would recharge its efforts. So maybe that animated armor is not actually animated armor so much as a rug of smothering, and it doesn't trigger until the fighter's in it, crushing and stealing her soul, which is, surprise,